Hello and welcome to MWEB's Entrepreneur Zone. I'm Paul Hobden, and with me today I have from NoMU, Paul Raphaely. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about the NoMU story.
NoMU was started in December 2000, originally mostly because Tracy had intended to launch a range of products into a few delicatessens with a view to opening her own store ultimately. And we field tested about 15 odd different products in a range of categories just to see how the brand would be received, what Tracy's vision would be interpreted as. And within about 3 months, we had a prospective listing with Pick n Pay and a first international export inquiries from across the country. So before we sort of knew it, what started off as a joke or an experiment suddenly became a little proposition, although it took about another year for it to turn into a proper business. So I'd be lying if I said for the first year I didn't have to carry on as a brand manager and Tracy didn't have to continue with her catering business. But after about a year, we had successfully processed about 2 or 3 export orders, and we were supplying Pick n Pay and a number of other delicatessens and spas and those sort of places. So we remain, even to this day, constantly sort of surprised at how quickly it's all grown.
And was it a business born out of an opportunity that you saw or out of a passion?
Tracy and I are both quite entrepreneurial by nature, which means that we have terrible authority issues. We can't work for anybody else. We both tried. Tracy's the worst waitress you'll ever come across. And I found myself coming to the end of a career in the liquor business where my options were getting increasingly more limited. Tracy, I'd spurred her to start this sort of food experiment to see what would happen. And she didn't want to be in catering anymore. There were too many peaks and troughs. So for her, it was a logical thing to try and sort of concretize some other sort of business. But I think personality-wise, we needed to do something on our own. We were lucky that the chemistry between us worked very well, so we were able to work very well together. From that moment on, I was able to indulge my personal needs, which is to sort of, to build a brand, to go out to sort of fight an unwinnable fight. That's what gets me going. And Tracy just wanted to be involved with food and the development around food. So yes, it was partially driven by passion, partially driven by political necessity. My options were limited. And also because it was an emotional thing. Tracy and I realized we were onto something good. We work well together. I never thought that I would be buying goldfish in a house with a girl at the same time, but that happened too.
So Paul, the business took off pretty quickly, but there must have been challenges to begin with.
Yeah, I know in the beginning, cash flow was a major issue. We only had about 12,486 Rand to start. And that was what was required to buy the initial ingredients, the packaging, some graphic design, some digital printing. Also, it was in an industry which was heavily over-competitive, there was far too much competition, I should say. It's not as if the world needed spices in tins that you can't see or touch or taste or feel at all. So there would have been a lot of conventional logic against doing what we did. And then, of course, there was the fact that 12 years ago, South Africa was a very optimistic place. You could launch a good idea, package it well, but with no marketing budget whatsoever, you can have the greatest idea around, but if you don't know how to present it correctly, no one's going to notice.
You talk a lot about your packaging there, and it is always very striking and distinctive. Do you see that as part of the product?
For sure. My father would always say that everybody is a salesman in life, even a plumber. And we take the same view on packaging, which is not to say that our packaging is a plumber, but it's a frontline troop, a soldier that has to be able to fight on its own with or without an above-the-line budget. So in our case, we wanted very specifically to make sure that we could break through the clutter no matter where we were, no matter where you found the product. So our lead with the packaging was to make absolutely certain that surrounded by the sort of competition we had at the time when we started, we would definitely have standout appeal and certainly enough appeal to get people's attention just long enough that they would try the product. Once they tried it, then we put our faith in our quality. And I think that our quality was the real standout strength. So the packaging is certainly crucial, but even the best-dressed plumber won't get repeat work if he doesn't know how to handle a U-bend.
That really is a challenge for a small player in a market where there are some giants with big marketing budgets. How do you compete effectively?
I think the trick is to rely on the things that you're good at. In Tracy's case, she has an eye for innovation and an eye for originality. So her ambition was always to try and go to the market with something that the big guys had either not thought of yet or had thought of but were not doing a good job of it. You can use our hot chocolate as a strong example. Until we came along and told South Africa that it's okay, you can actually have a sophisticated choice in hot chocolate. Until that point, our world was dominated by the colors red and purple, and we'd satisfied ourselves that chocolate just needs to taste like sugar. Cocoa can be a second thought. Our attitude in that world, again with no budget, is stand apart in terms of the way you present yourself and on the flavor, on the attributes, the things that you actually expect your product to deliver on. So in our case, your quality has to be there. You have to be original in the way that you present yourself and the way that you taste. And then most importantly, we find that being personal and sincere and quite authentic has been a major point of differentiation, in the sense that we receive upwards of 10 to 15 direct emails a week from consumers around the world, and they can be guaranteed a direct response from us, from me personally, in under 24 hours.
That personal engagement with your customers is fantastic. How are you using online to extend that?
Well, we've relied pretty much since the beginning on the basics, I think, in any marketing spread, the website, a certain amount of database development. We have a recipe card that we send out, or recipe cards that get sent to a database for about almost 22,000 people a month, which is a means of directly communicating with people and adding value. But it also, it satisfies Tracy's very personal urge to give presents. It's one of her favorite things in the whole world, is to give gifts. And so by giving away free recipes once a month, Tracy actually gets to sort of indulge herself, and we get to give somebody, or give our consumers, once again, something quite sincere and personal and warm, which is not necessarily how they get treated by larger companies as well, where somehow it always feels there's a residual feeling of you've been marketed to. In our case, we like to think that we're talking to. It's a subtle difference. On a more basic level, there's no way at all that we could have serviced the 38 export markets that we're sending out to without daily access to the internet and email. Without technology, NoMU would never have grown as fast. And one tends to forget that we started 12 years ago. Facebook was not around 12 years ago. I'm quite jealous of businesses that have started in the last 4 or 5 years for the means that social networking has given them to be able to proliferate a message very quickly and easily. It's kind of lazy doing that stuff these days, but it's far more effective than handing out strawberries and sweet rub at Pick and Pay Constantia, because I've done that too.
So you've seen a fair amount of change then over the time.
I think it's been a very dynamic and exciting time to be in marketing, certainly, and certainly as a small-scale businessman in South Africa. But I mean, change isn't limited to technology. It's limited to legislation, bureaucracy, and the international financial climate, which has been tricky.
With so many export markets, how has that been over the last few years?
Well, I'm pleased to say that despite the fact the world has gone into meltdown, we've managed to kind of ride it out by changing our strategy, refocusing on the South African market, improving our product line, just sort of harnessing what we do well and do it a little bit better. But I think things certainly would have been a hell of a lot stronger for everyone, obviously, if the world hadn't gone quite the way that it had. So it's a tantalizing guessing game to wonder how much better off we'd all be if things hadn't happened. But I'm relieved to say that I think NoMU was well positioned at the time to spend the time getting better and consolidating on what it did well in the interim. So I'm sort of excited for when things bounce back. And we're doing quite well now. I hope to do amazingly when people have money again.
Looking at your product lines, how do you develop those? What's the process that you go through?
Well, you're going to laugh at this one. It's a bit ludicrous. Tracy will wake up on an average morning, make it Tuesday, and she will decide that she wants the most arbitrary product imaginable, but it'll be something so specifically unique to her requirements at home that she will then discard any other programs that we had in place, totally throw them out the window, just because she now wants this particular item. And that it's hell to work with that sort of unpredictability, but the reality on the other hand is that it carries with it a lot of sincerity and authenticity. You know, you're dealing with a brand that is actually generated by someone's very personal needs. It's not quite the same as an R&D department or a research and development team that gets put on the job of answering a consumer need, because that's the last thing that goes through our mind. I hate to say it, but the consumer's literally the end of our thought process. The beginning is what Tracy actually wants, and we trust in Trace.
For a lot of small businesses, getting in with one of the large retailers is seen as kind of a fantastic win. But I'm sure along with it comes some challenges and some difficulties. What advice could you give them?
I think The best advice is to consider what your product or service is first. And then once you have a solid idea of what it is you're selling and to who you think you need to sell it to, then consider things with balance. In our case, being a niche or a premium end food product, South Africa is a peculiar place to launch this. You can't necessarily just exist in general retail. You need a balance of specialty trade to support it. Corporate gifting is important. But South Africa is a very receptive place to start small businesses with great services, once again, that are well packaged. If you can position it in the correct place, I think you can probably achieve a hell of a lot faster here than in most other places in the world. So with balance and a degree of forethought, you should just dive in and take whatever opportunities you can get.
You've spoken about the hope for the future as the economy improves. Where to for NoMU?
Well, there's scope for all sorts of things. We began with the idea of having our own retail space. That's not totally off the cards. We haven't even looked at publishing yet. Of course, when you have the skills that you've developed over the last 12 years, again, it's tantalizing to think of doing all sorts of different food products. So there's scope for Tracy to be selfish in whatever she wants still, and I'm dreading what could come next. But we'll see. It's early days. I mean, by commercial standards, NoMU is a baby. We're only 12 years old, so there's still plenty to come. But everyone should just watch the hell out because we're coming through.
And that brings us to our round of rapid-fire questions. What's the best advice you've ever received, Paul?
My dad said, "Don't box hard, box clever."
And your best moment as an entrepreneur?
Every single time someone tells me that they know the brand. That's a huge victory.
And your biggest mistake?
Going into food.
What quality do you look for in people that you work with?
Honesty and courage.
What does an entrepreneur need to succeed?
Painful levels of optimism, like irritatingly optimistic. That's what you need to be.
And what gives you inspiration as a small business owner?
Used to be my parents, for Tracy and I both, and now it's more our children. They're the best motivation in the world.
What would you do a bit differently?
I think I would stick to one product and do it very well. And maybe this time a little bit of research and development.
What makes South Africa a good place to be a small business owner?
I think in South Africa, if you've got a good product and you package it well and it's a good service fundamentally, it's an easy place to get recognized. South Africans like good news. And if you can present them with good news, you can get a lot of attention very quickly.
What keeps you awake at night?
Changing legislation, labor law.
And what gets you going in the morning?
Very strong coffee, or the opportunity to show someone up for not doing the job well.
Paul, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us in the Entrepreneur Zone. I'm Paul Hobden. Thank you and goodbye.